Shalom Aleichem. Today we're going to continue with the second part of the series about marrying more than one woman, more than one lady as a wife. The part number one, we spoke about if there's any issues with the Torah, with the Rabainu, if al pi chiyuvim of the responsibilities that a husband has to his wife, is it a problem to marry more than one? And we concluded that min etzem adin from Torah and the Rabainu shouldn't be under problem as long as it meets all those conditions. Rabainu Gershom came along, and there's a lot of history that's associated with this Rabainu Gershom. Rabainu Gershom is very famous for making different charamas, and a lot of it is due to the time that he lived. But here is one of the probably the most famous cherem that he made, and this is a cherem that's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Aleph, Seif Yud. I'm going to read the words of the Mechaber, and then try to elaborate what says the Svarim and the Poskim about it. Rabainu Gershom, Siman Aleph, Seif Yud. Rabainu Gershom, Hichrim, Al Hanoisei Isha Al Ishtay. Even though that in Sif Test we said that Noisei Adam Kama Nashim, a man is allowed to marry as many as he wants, and he suggests not more than 4. Nevertheless, Rabainu Gershom came along and it was machrim, putting cherem al hanoisei isha al ishtay. One who marries more than one wife, he should be placed in cherem. This has many points that we have to understand, and today we will only discuss the reasoning behind his cherem, and how rock solid is this cherem. And the Mitzvah next year, part 3, will be when and how could you actually break the cherem. Meaning to say, Rabainu Gershom didn't apply his cherem under different circumstances, different situations. So it's brought 5 different reasons, perhaps what was behind this cherem that Rabainu Gershom established. And I have it in my chart here on the left in the box. The Rashba says, number 1 says the Rashba, Kidei ligdar b'fnei ha'paritzim, ha'mis'alalim b'nesheseyem shaloi karoi. It's actually brought in the Darkei Moshe also, Siman Aleph Eis Yud, that if somebody is going to marry more than one, we find that the paritzim, those who are not that modest, treat their women, their wives, very disgusting. So, uvachein, we don't want to allow more than one wife. It's an interesting connection, because after all, we are talking about the Yidden, and not talking about the paritzim. Number 2 is the time of the Ran. The Ran says it's not only a benefit that the woman should not be mistreated, but it's also a benefit for the husband. We know that it's automatically going to happen, that there's going to be disputes, there's going to be fights, there's going to be competition. So there should be less fights in the home. Rabainu Gershom established that you shouldn't marry more than one. Now it is interesting that some of the Mefarshim say in the Chumash, where it says the parsha of Ben Tzur and murder, and it says the parsha Kiyil Ish Ben Shtei Nashim Achas Auva Achas Snua. So the Mefarshim say that Snua, not necessarily the husband himself didn't like one of the two. It actually one of the 2 women went and tattletale and created this animosity, created this hatred towards the second one. So in other words, whenever there's more than one wife, Marba Nechasim, Marba Daiga, we know, Marba Nashim, Marba Zima, Marba Mariva, it's definitely going to be a fight. So to protect that, Rabainu Gershom suggested and placed a cherem that they shouldn't marry more than one wife. The Maharam Padva says two things. First of all, he says that we already mentioned in the previous year that the Shulchan Aruch says that you can marry as many as you want as long as you're able to support them. Now, it could be at this point in time he could foresee how we'll have enough to support more than one wife. But how do we know the long term that he will have enough to support them? So because it's going to get tight in Mezonos and Parnasa, the suggestion and the cherem is not to marry more than one wife. The second thing that Rabainu Padva said, that we know that Rabainu Gershom made other charamas too. He placed a cherem and some other things too. For example, Rabainu Gershom also placed a cherem that a person should not be megarish his ishtay bal karcha. He's not allowed to force his wife to accept a get. It has to, Alpidin, you could, Alpidin v'shilchum so you don't have to ask him or anything. But Rabainu Gershom did not want to allow Gershom bal karcha. So to protect that, Rabainu Gershom thought to himself and said, here there's a situation where a husband and wife that are already not getting along, and I already established that he can't make a Gershom bal karcha. So what is the person going to do? He's just going to ignore that wife and marry a second one. And by having a second wife, it's automatic. She's going to be forced. The first one will be forced on her own to accept to be willing to accept the get. So these two gzeires, these two charames, are working hand in hand to protect each other. Yes, you cannot divorce your wife bal karcha, and you can't even convince her or force her to accept a get by taking a second wife, and that's the reason he put a cherem al amaisa isha al ishta. In the Sefer Sheven Tzasin, it is brought that we know that after the Churban Abayis, people were so hurt and people were so mourning after the Churban that they said, you know what? Perhaps we shouldn't eat meat. Perhaps we shouldn't marry. We shouldn't enjoy Olam Hazeh. So the Gemara says, you know what? Forget about that. Just continue living your life, but just always remember the Churban. And Mutav Shiyu Shoygin. So therefore, Rabainu Gershom came along perhaps and was grazer. Shaloi Lisa Beis Nashim, not to marry two, because Roivat Sivur Yochlu Lamed B'Isha Achas. And the truth is, to satisfy yourself, you could survive on one and only having one wife. And after all, to increase and have more pleasure is not the Yiddish way. So perhaps this is the reason why he says one wife and not more. Always have the Churban in mind too. So Rabainu Gershom came along and says, I don't want you to marry more than one. The cherem is a very powerful thing. A cherem could be a borderline to machlokes a poskim. Did it become in the level of the Raisa? Because a cherem is once the cherem is established, even though it doesn't say in the Torah, Rabainu Gershom was the one that established it. But once it became into the level of cherem, it might be borderline Isser D'Oraisa. There's a machlokes a poskim about that. Others say that it cannot be that level because then it's sort of questioning the Isser of Baal Tosef. The Torah prohibits X amount. You can't add more to what the Torah prohibits. So perhaps the solution for that is that you'll see in the next year that he didn't forbid it forever and ever. He gave it a time period because he didn't make it a mitzvah the way the Torah prohibits things. But definitely the cherem is a serious matter, and you can't just ignore this cherem. A cherem is a very serious matter. Who did he make the cherem on? Is the cherem specifically on the man who has the chiyuv to marry, or even on the woman? So the Ber Hatev in Sivkat and Chaf brings that Shnei Ashkenaziyos mutaros linasei lisfardi echad. You will read later on that says that the Beis Yosef believed that this Gezeira, this Chero is only Chal till the Elef HaChamishi, till the end of the 5,000 years. After then, the Gezeira is not Chal anymore. The Chero is not Chal. The Ramah, however, paskins that we're machmir even past the Elef HaChamishi. So, now that there is a machlekes between the Mechaber and the Ramah, Sephardi versus Ashkenazi, so the Sephardi, in theory, is allowed to marry 2 women. He does not have this cherem. But what happens if he wants to marry 2 Ashkenazic women? Do they have to protect themselves from the cherem, being that Ashkenazim follow the opinion of the Ramah? And the Be'er Hativ says that Shnei Ashkenaziyos mutaros linasei l'Sfardi echad. So it's mashma that they don't have the cherem. The cherem only applies on the woman, on the man. From the other hand, he says, Ashkenazi echad shekibal cherem. However, an Ashkenazi who for him the cherem still applies, gam heim muzhares va'asuros l'nasei. Even the woman who perhaps, they could say that the cherem was not chal of them, but if they're dealing with a man, a husband who has the cherem, they can't mislead him. But if it's a Sephardi, a man that does not have the cherem anymore, for whatever reason, 2 Ashkenazi women are allowed to marry him. So, the next thing we have to figure out is, if the reasons are correct, whichever reason you take for this cherem, we have to know if the woman, if it's to protect the woman, what happens if she is moichel? If she is moichel. Now, there's two things you have to understand. How could she be moichel once there's a cherem? A cherem is a serious matter. Cherem is not something you could be moichel on. I understand that the basis of the rule is to protect her, but once it went from a reason to a cherem, who is the woman to be mevatel the cherem? So this is a discussion, and the Darkei Moshe in Ois Ches says that loy mahani mechila l'roiv ha'poskim. Roiv the poskim hold that mechila, the woman saying it doesn't bother me, the first woman saying it doesn't bother me, is not a reason to allow him. It's not enough to allow him to overrule. In other words, she's satisfied. Once it became a cherem, it's aser. How strict is this cherem? So again, this is debatable. Does the cherem go even b'makom mitzvah? There are certain times that the Torah allows, or perhaps suggests, that the man should marry a second wife. Where, for example, the Shulchan Aruch continues about a Yavama. A Yavama is never a woman who lost her husband and she doesn't have any children. So her husband's brother, should be making base achiv. Now the brother to marry her, the brother himself is married. So how does he do yibum? So according to the Mechaber, avol b'yavama lo hechrim. Whenever there's a situation that similarly to Yavama, where there's a mitzvah to marry, Rabainu Gershom did not have the guts, or Rabainu Gershom did not establish his cherem in a time when the Torah says that it's mutter to and suggests that it's a mitzvah. However, the Ramah says no. Based on the problems Rabainu Gershom saw, Rabainu Gershom was placed his cherem who are din b'chol makim, and Ramah suggests the first opinion a little further. He says not only b'yavama, but any dichui mitzvah. What would be any dichui mitzvah? For example, it says in halacha that if somebody's married for 10 years and they don't have children, you suggest to marry somebody else, or any other situation like that. The Ramah, the first opinion, follows the Shita of the Mechaber, that Yavama is a mitzvah, Esher Shonim V'Layolda is a mitzvah, of the mitzvah of Puruvu, you would be able to marry a second one. Yesh Cholkim, however, says the Rama, there are other opinions that hold the Chedem de Rabainu Gershom Noyeg Afilu B'Makom Mitzvah. Even in these cases where the Shilas of Puruvu, Mitzvah D'Oraisa, the Shilah of Yibum, there's not Shilas, there's Mitzvahs of Yibum, Rabainu Gershom put the brakes down and said no, because of the Chshashas, because of the time that we had. Even B'Makom Mitzvah. So, let's summarize Sif Yud. Rabainu Gershom came along and placed a cherem for one of these 5-6 reasons. He placed a cherem, a person should not marry a second wife when he's still married to the first. The cherem is primarily on the man, and some part of it, sometimes it even applies on the woman. Could a woman come along and say, it doesn't bother me? No. Because once it reached the level of a cherem, a woman cannot break the cherem. In a case where there's a shilah of a mitzvah, where the Torah would allow a second wife, so this is Machlokes Mechaber Ramah. Mechaber says that the B'Makom Mitzvah Rabainu Gershom did not place his cherem. The Ramah says even then he placed his cherem. Lahalacha, even the Mechaber in Sif Yud Aleph says, Toy v'lases takana b'charamas v'neduyim. Even if we believe that the original cherem did not apply anymore, it is right that you should make a takana in every place for themselves. Make rules and perhaps a cherem for anybody al misha yisa isal istay. It's not a healthy thing. It's not a healthy thing. Now, there's one more answer. There's one more time which is given. It's brought from the Chassam Sofer. Another time for a cherem de Rabainu Gershom in this case. And that is, as the times have gone, the Goyim also put up a rule in each of their religions that one should marry not more than one wife. So Rabainu Gershom came along and said, B'din, I should not be that strict about this. B'din, I should insist that we are different, and because we are different, we don't have those issues. We don't, Rahman al-San, follow their religion, and we should allow this to take place, just to show that we're different, just to show that we are different. However, because of the sakana that might take place, that the guy will see that we are breaking their rules, and there's something that they're very makbid on, might cause a sakana, says the Chassam Sofer, therefore you're not allowed to marry a second wife. So to summarize it, even though the next year you'll hear that perhaps the cherem is not chal anymore, it was not, and originally they pushed the B'kol HaMedinos. Nevertheless, the Mechaber himself says that Toiv Lases Takana, and this is the Mechaber. He says it's still good, it's still a good thing to make a cherem for anybody who marries a second wife.